Hey guys, it's Mike Bartholomew back with Poker X Factor. Here to do another video series. This one is on the Saturday 320 Super Knockout. I think it's a really good tournament for the buy-in size, which is a little bit bigger. It's $320, but it's you see a lot of soft spots in this tournament. Another reason why I wanted to do this video is, as you may have gathered from the title, it is a knockout and this one's a super knockout, so actually half of the buy-in goes to a bounty. So there's a little bit different strategies involved with just the value of the bounties, um, and so you find yourself in a little bit different spots than you would in normal tournaments. I did one of the other videos I did was on the Sunday Brawl that I won a few months ago or a couple months ago. Um, it is also a knockout tournament, but it's slightly different in the sense that it's not a super knockout. So each bounty is only $40 on a $255 tournament. Where in this tournament's $320 and the bounty is $154. So actually, half of the buy-in is a bounty. So a little bit different strategy, like I said, than a normal tournament, and creates for some interesting spots. So let's get started here. First thing we'll take a look at, like I do whenever I get a new tournament or a new table, I like to take a look at my table and see who's there. So we see a couple good regs. Actually, Russ Carson, who's another Poker X Factor instructor, very good player, right at the top of the table there. Guy Fuorna, God's Teacher, Jolly Mackey, X Zola. They're all good regs. Yeah, a couple of the other guys I recognize, but not really too sure. So you want to try to play pots with guys that are the unknowns or not the best players at the table. So let's jump right in and see if we can find some good spots here. So the first hand that we play is pocket sixes, and looks like we just go in for 3x raise and it gets through. So a lot of pretty standard stuff earlier in tournaments. Um, so I decided to flat the raise here. I recognize this guy's name, but I'm not sure if maybe I have a note on him or something. But I mix it up. I like to call pre-flop in position with decent hands that can be disguised and you can flop well, and they're hands that you can win a lot of chips when you do make big hands. Um, I'm not going to probably get carried away early in the tournament pre-antes with too many bluffs with this sort of hand, but just thought I want to take some flops with this sort of stuff. So, anyways, we totally whiff the flop and we go away. And the 14th hand of the tournament, we find pocket aces, which is always nice. So we go in for 3x raise. We get called by God's Teacher on the button. And we flop pretty well, pretty safe, pretty dry board. So we go in for about a half pot C bet. My sizing typically at the start of tournaments um, is a little bit my flop sizing. My flop C bet sizing is a little bit bigger than it is later in tournaments. I typically bet about half pot at the start of tournaments, whereas later in the tournament I'll bet 30 to 40% on a C bet. So, anyways, he calls. I'm just gonna, this is a board where I'm just going for three streets of value. Again, I'm gonna bet big on this particular turn because if he did float us, this brings in a lot of draws. So we're gonna charge him full price, for any sort of draws, or if he has a jack, we're gonna make him pay. So, anyways, he folds. We win a decent sized pot early in the tournament. 6-4 offsuit, I believe. Oh, it just folds around. That's pretty boring. And then the small blind, I believe this is just a raise and take. Yeah, so I just 3x. As you'll notice, I've said in other videos that I think it's really important to 2.5 or 3x raise from the small blind rather than just min raise. Okay, so this is an interesting spot. Well, not an interesting spot for us. I mean, it's an easy fold now, but I decide to open queen nine of diamonds. I I open a little wider than most people. And yeah, I think it's a fine open. There's a couple guys, we're playing seven-handed here. So anyways, Vlado, three bets, which I probably, should just go away to his three bet anyways. Russ Carson, um, four cold four bets against me, one of his buddies, and under the gun 2.5x raise. I think it's very safe to say that Russ has aces or kings here. Pre-antes, Russ is almost never cold four betting anything other than what he's going to get it in pre-flop with. So I think it's very likely that he probably has something like aces or kings here. So we'll see how the hand plays out. Guy flats. Vlado flats him. And the flop comes 5-5-6. Pretty safe board for kings or aces, so we're going to probably see a c-bet. And the guy just jams. Easy call if Russ has that one of those hands. And he sure enough has aces. Ooh. Guy gets him on the turn, though. Makes it straight. Interesting three bet. Definitely something to note by this Vlado guy. That he three bet an under the gun raise with 3-4 diamonds and then called a cold four bet out of position. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. So the very next hand, we get ace 7 of hearts. And so we just peel out of the big blind, which I think is fine. Jolly Mackey's really aggressive. It's very likely that we have a better hand than Jolly Mackey here. Very potentially the best hand here, even pre-flop. So we don't need to be raising it up pre-antes. We can just call. If I was not suited, I would potentially be more inclined to 3-bet, but I think peeling it's just fine. And then Jolly Mackey checks back, so I hope that I go in for a bet here. Zola has checked again. It's pretty likely that Zola has some sort of broadways like Jack 10, Queen 10, Queen Jack, that sort of thing. So yeah, I hope that I go in for a bet here, and I do bet about just under half pot, and it's a small pot. They both go away. A few hands later, Jack 10. Table being playing pretty passive. I wasn't getting, I was opening. There was a lot of raise and takes, I should say. Okay, so I think this is, pretty standard. I mean, I guess you could flat this hand suited ace 10 when you're this deep, this early. I just like to take the initiative here and take the lead. It's going to be a lot more difficult for him to play out of position without the lead. So if I'm going to enter the pot here, I typically just like to 3-bet. He does call, and we flop pretty well. We have a couple of options. I know sometimes people will check back here, but I don't think he's going to fold a queen. I just think that I'm probably going to c-bet like all of my air here. The only thing that I probably check back is like, I don't know, queen, jack, king, queen, stuff like that. So I don't mind either. I can see merit to doing both, checking back or betting. I think against this particular player who he's going to think I'm c-betting my entire range here, I think it's better to c-bet. And I do, and he calls. So I think now it's just, yeah, I'm probably going to try to go for 3 streets here. I mean, if he were to call here, I guess you could check back the river. He could have like ace jack, but that's about all I think that he would have that beats you at this point. I think he's trying to get more chips in the pot, either right here or on the flop if he had ace queen. So he just calls again, and it's a pretty okay. So now this river, it's pretty safe in the sense that we chop with ace jack now, so we're only losing to pocket fours, pocket fives, um, ace queen, and ace king. So I typically probably just jam here and try to get like ace jack to fold. Um, ace jack probably doesn't fold that much, but you know, you never know. And I just don't think he's got better than us here. So yeah, I'd probably just jam. Well, I go for thin value. And he did have ace jack, so we got kind of lucky there on the river. So we pick up 4-5 suited out of the big blind. It's perfectly fine to peel here, even if no one else enters the pot. Once someone else enters the pot, I'm never folding here. And it's pretty easy to get away from this flop now. So, you know, you just proceed with a little bit of caution when you know, the wider you start to peel out of the big blind, you should start to peel. You should start to proceed a little bit more with caution. Uh, this is an interesting spot. I mean, I probably prefer to three bet this spot. I mean, it is an under the gun raise, but I think this really in tournaments like we're gonna get we're gonna get called by a lot of like Jack Queen, King Jack, King Queen, all that sort of stuff, just because we're so deep. So I think there's a lot of hands that we dominate, and I doubt that he's just gonna like four bet Ace Queen here. He might four bet Ace King and try to get it in, but you know we're deep enough that he might just flat Ace King. So you know, you take the lead, and when he misses flops, we're going to win with a C bet a lot. So I probably prefer. I just don't feel like we win the hand that often when we just flat here. You know, the one thing that you do have going for you when you do flat this hand is that these guys aren't going to think that this is our hand. Like our hand doesn't look like Ace Jack, Ace Queen. So we do when we do hit well, it's a little bit more disguised. And not only that, but if it comes like 6, 7, 8 flop, now that looks like it smashes our range. So, you know, if it were to come 6, 7, 8 and I've just flatted, then I probably rep a set depending on the action. But I think it's always good to have like a a secondary plan when, you know, before you do anything. So I think you always need to be thinking, okay, I can either win the hand by making the best hand, or depending on the way that I play it, let's create the most believable story. If the board comes something believable that we can actually turn into a bluff. So I always think about that when I'm depending on the way I play a hand. So if I play it disguised, then I have more options on what sorts of things to bluff. Whereas typically, you know, the more raising that happens pre-flop, ranges tend to get more polarized. So what I mean when I say that is that if I three bet here, my range becomes a lot smaller it than my range is when I just flat. So right now my range is way wider than my range would be if I three bet. And it goes the same with is if Xzola had three bet and we cold four bet, then the range is even more polarized um, than it is if I just three bet. So the more raising that happens pre-flop, the more the the ranges get polarized, and therefore we can't rep quite as much. So when I flatted here pre-flop, I probably was thinking, um, you know, when I make good hands, it's going to be disguised, and not only that, but I also have more opportunity to bluff at different different texture boards. So we'll just see how it plays out here. So this is a board that um, obviously we haven't connected with at all, and it's going to be pretty tough to like rep something. Um, you know, I'm pretty much only repping like twos and eights or something if I were to turn my hand into a bluff now. And I think the queen is pretty good for his range, and he's betting into two people. When it comes like 6, 7, 8, I'm much more inclined to make a big bluff as all three of those cards hit my sets. not only that, but like I probably call with 9-10 and 7-8 and stuff like that. So it's just not a good board to turn into my hand into a bluff. So I probably just fold, especially with that other caller, and just get away from it. Interesting though to see, Jack, Ace Jack. I definitely used to always just three bet it if I was entering the pot. Um, so we go in the next hand, 2 hands later actually, with Jack 10. We flop really good, and the guy goes away. So no, not much action there. And then about 10 hands later, we pick up a pretty nice looking hand. So we go in for a three bet. Like I said, Jolly Mac, he's really aggressive. I do have notes on him. I'm pretty sure he's really spazzy pre-flop. So I'm raising. It's against tighter players. I think flatting kings and aces pre-flop, pre-antes is a good way to disguise it. But with kings against a guy who's really aggressive and potentially pretty prone to four betting us here, and then going to be a pretty good spot for us to get it in with them. I much prefer the three bet, and especially with my image as well. Uh, he knows that I'm going to be three betting pretty wide, so it just works out better in general for me to be three betting this spot. So I do three bet, and he just rips in 3,300, which I can already tell you is just a bad play, regardless what his hand is. I don't care. He could have any two cards in the deck, whether it be aces or deuce seven or ace king or ace queen. There's no two cards that he can have that I like this play. I just think it's really bad. It's either really spewy if he doesn't have a good hand, or he's missing a ton of value against me, who should be a perceived as a fairly aggressive player. So to do this with a huge hand is just kind of silly as well. And he shows up with ace queen, which I just think is just atrocious. I mean, if he really wants my 333 chips that bad, I mean, good on him, but I am absolutely 100% never calling with worse there. Even though I just said that he's an aggressive player, I'm just never calling with worse. So we pick up ace queen suited in the big blind, and pure luck opens. I'd see this guy around a bit. I think it's fine. I think we're getting called. Guys, guys will play lots of hands, even to three bets pre-flop when we're this early, this deep. So and I find that people these days are flatting three bets way wider than they used to, especially if they're in position. Uh, they just, people realize how important position is, and good players feel like they can win the pot so often in position, uh, regardless whether they make their hand or not. So I think three betting here is, it's definitely my favorite option, just because we're building a pot with a really good hand, and we're getting called by a lot of hands that we have absolutely crushed. I don't expect him ever to four bet as light here pre antes. There's just not really much reason for it. Like even with ace jack and stuff, I just think he would flat or maybe fold, but I doubt it. But um, if he four bets here, we can just fold. Um, I guess we're deep enough you could potentially peel the four bet depending on the size, but then that gets pretty ugly pre-flop when we are out of position. So, anyways, he does call, and we totally whiff. Um, I'm c betting this board 100%, like literally 100%. When I three bet out of the big blind and get called, I'm just c betting here all day long, and he folds. So I think it's likely that he calls with I think he called pre-flop with something like I said, Jack 10, Jack Queen, King Jack, stuff like that. All the stuff that we have dominated. So I think it's really important to see bet that flop. And I mean, if he were to call one, I think it's safe to say that he's floating us with ace high, or more likely has a medium pair. Um, Anything from, I doubt he calls twos. Yeah, I mean, even with twos, he's probably calling on that flop. He's probably calling one in position this deep. Um, because he wouldn't think I have a 5 or a 3 or a 9 very often. So I either am c betting all my ace jack, ace queen, ace king, or have a better pair. And he probably doesn't think that I'm just going to barrel him off with, say, ace queen. So I do think he calls with all of his pairs. Um, and depending on the turn, I think this is a board that would depend on the turn. So if it comes like a king on the turn, I'm definitely betting again, and probably 3 streets. If my read is, if he calls the flop, that he has, any hand twos through tens, um, I'm gonna make him make difficult calls. If he happens to have threes, fives, or nines, then he's probably gonna win a pretty big pot against me, anyways. That's just the way I would probably proceed. So he folds on the flop, and we take down another pot. And then 2 hands later, we pick up pocket sevens. And this is just a flat. Like, I just don't do anything other than flat here. There's no reason really to 3-bet. It's a good hand to play in position. Yeah, it's just flat here all day long. And I probably don't even flat, even if it folded to Zola and he opened, or Jolly Mackie. Well, Jolly Mackie we'd be all in with. But Zola, I potentially would 3-bet to take the lead. But that's about it. It's also really important, like we talked about, this being a super knockout. So Jolly Mackie, when I played that huge hand with him, he got left with like almost 0 chips here. So right now, everyone at the table is trying to get in a pot when he's all in, and we should, really be focusing on trying to get him all in. So what I mean by that is that, like, when he's in the big blind, we should literally probably be raising any 2 cards to play. He only has 2 blinds or whatever. So, or sorry, I guess he has 5 blinds. But we should be, the value of that is definitely worth 5 blinds. So, and everyone else should be thinking that. Even Gifu Orna, or whatever his name is, he's getting kind of short too, and people are going to start thinking about his bounty as well. So just something to keep in mind in these tournaments, especially. And you'll notice later in the tournament that there starts to be a point where, of course, I think this tournament has like 30,000 up top or something, and there starts to be a point where obviously the $150 bounty becomes a lot less important. When you're down to like 50 people or something, and now you're playing for the tournament dollars up top. So it slowly fades from the importance of the bounty to the importance of the pay structure. 6 or 7 hands later, we pick up Queen 10, and we're in the big blind. I imagine I just peel here. Yep, perfectly fine peel. Don't even hate a 3-bet there, to be honest. When it's 3-way, we could just go in for a squeeze. Don't hate it, but also you can just flick in chips here. It's probably the more common play these days. Two hands later, tens. Yeah, I think overcalling is probably the best here. We've got a under the gun raise, under the gun +1 call, 3-bet. I mean, folding, I know people that fold. I don't hate it. At the end of the day, you just have a pair of tens, and there's some pretty strong action. I mean, under the gun raise is usually fairly strong. Under the gun call should be a decent hand. And then this guy 3-bets against that action, like, probably pretty decent. but it's still only 240 chips. We have a pretty good stack. This guy is deep as well. And we have possession on him. So I definitely think it's worth the overcall here and set mine. It's likely that one or both of these guys are going to call. So, um, I think we're definitely getting the right price to overcall and set mine here. I also think it's pretty unlikely that either of these guys four bets here. They would probably have to have like queens, kings, or aces, and queens might not even four bet. So, uh, yeah, I think the overcall is totally standard. They do both call, and we get to play a pot. So this is an interesting spot. So it gets checked all the way around. I think it's pretty safe to say that Zola has not connected. I think he bets every. The only hand I think he's checking here, that is decent value, that he has decent showdown value with, is Ace Queen. I mean Queen Jack, but he probably doesn't three bet Queen Jack in that particular spot pre-flop. Um, so I think it's safe to say that he has like Ace Jack, and he doesn't want to c bet into three people. If he had Ace 10 or Ace Jack and it's like two guys or just heads up, he's c betting it all day. But when he doesn't have position and it's four ways to the flop, he feels like someone's connected and not folding. So he's probably thinking he doesn't want to c bet Ace 10 or Ace Jack. Then he's also got like he potentially could have nines, eights. I mean, who knows? But he definitely c bets aces, kings, queens, king, queen, ace, king, pocket sevens. He wouldn't have sevens, but all of those strong value hands, he's c betting here. So I think it's pretty safe to say that right away we can not worry about Zola's range at all here. Guy Fiorna and Vlado, they both definitely check top pair or second pair here. They don't lead into three other guys after calling a three bet out of position. Um, so yeah, I think we can check back here and see what happens on the turn. I do think that if Guy Fiorna or Vlado have a king, that they are going to bet the turn. They probably also bet big flush draws. I would say that they probably check. I think Guy Fiorna checks a queen, but Vlado might bet a queen to figure out where he is. So, anyways, it's an interesting spot, and let's just proceed and see what happens. So the turn is nothing to really worry about or feel as though it changed anything. Um, obviously pocket fives are possible, but it's tough to make sets. So it checks around again, and I think this is a really good opportunity to put a bet in. I It's kind of a merge. Like I think we are getting called by worse. Like I think Jack 10 calls. I think pocket nines might call. There are some things, and I think like I would probably play. There are certain hands that I would play this way. That I mean, if I bet here, my hand doesn't really look like tens. Um, so I think I probably put in a bet here. Oh, I check again. I'm kind of surprised, and I guess I felt like it feels as though I have enough showdown value with tens to check back, but in position after it goes checked around twice, I feel like we can fire a bet there, and it's merging. We can get called by worse. You're charging for hearts and Jack 10 draws, and the only thing that I feel like would call that we lose to is a queen. I felt strongly that no one had a king, so yeah, I mean, and then once it checks around on the river, I don't think at this point there's any point in betting. There might be a little bit of value, but I still think like Vlado could potentially check like a queen, or Gifu Orna. So I just decided to check and cross my fingers and hope. Yeah, so you know, it's pretty rare to see it go four-way to showdown like that and third pair win, but it happens, and I think this is a good example of you know the fact that tens do have a decent amount of showdown in spots like this that you don't necessarily need to turn your hand into a bluff. I I mean, on the turn, I don't mind the bet because it would be a merge and we're getting value from things that are worse. Um, but like, there's a possibility that 4-7 might call the turn. And if someone had Jack 10, they're calling the turn. And if someone had hearts, they're calling the turn. So I don't mind a merge bet on the turn. And it also controls showdown price. So what I mean by that is if we bet the turn small into 1K, like say 350 chips, um, and someone has like a queen, it prevents them from betting, say, 550 on the river with a queen. And if this is the run out, like if he bets 550, I'm going to be pretty tempted to call with tens. So it just controls our showdown price also. So interesting hand. We win the pot and moving along. Just an open. Checked all the way. Looks like he got checked down and we lose. And then the two hands later, we play King Jack again, suited, and this will be the last hand of the first segment of this video. So, okay, so this is an interesting spot. So Jolly Mackey's all in. I probably would have called any two cards here. There's going to be a lot of people to this flop because they all are trying to get the bounty as well. Okay, so now Apes is all in, um, and he's squeezing, thinking that we're just calling this two blinds with like potentially any two cards. I think my shoving range, if I were Apes, would be pretty wide. As one, if you do isolate, you're basically flipping against any two cards with a lot of dead money and the bounty to play for. And you've also got to think that the three callers ranges are pretty much any two cards in the deck. So I really don't, and this is where a knockout tournament differs because I would never call this shove for this many chips in this scenario in like a normal tournament. But when there's the dynamic of the knockout and someone all in for two blinds, and this guy knows that we're calling to try to get his bounty, therefore we probably have any cards. Like his range just becomes super wide. Like his range is obviously way wider too than in any other tournament. He would probably just flat any reasonable hand, and he's probably I think he's got some mediocre aces. Anything huge like kings or aces, I think he's still playing for like the tournament value, and he's just going to three bet and try to get more chips in the center and go post flop. But I just decided it was a good spot to gamble. King Jack of Diamonds, probably ahead, decent, playing decent against his shoving range in this particular spot in a super knockout. So I did call, and Vlado called as well. He decided to gamble with Jack 9, and so the analysis is pretty accurate. So Jolly Mackey goes all in with whatever. He only had a couple blinds, so he's all in, and he happens to have a good hand. I flat a decent hand, which I would have flatted any two, and a couple other guys flat, and then this guy decides to just rip it in. And like I said, I just thought his shoving range was going to be pretty wide, with the exact reason of what I explained about the bounty. So I call with what I think is ahead of his range, and then Vlado decides that he's going to call as well with a hand that plays pretty well multi-way. Uh, and there's a lot of bounties. Like there's this bounty, and then a lot of chips. I don't think he has any. I think he's just all in. I don't think he has anyone covered. So, anyways, we ended up getting our chips in an amazing spot, and let's see how it runs out. Well, I certainly flopped pretty well. yeah, so looks like we ended up shipping all of it, and we got three bounties there in one hand. So that was like $452 we got just from that one hand. So that was a pretty fun spot. Like I said, a lot of interesting spots that you don't see in regular tournaments, or even in regular bounty tournaments like the Sunday Brawl, when the bounty is only 20% of the prize pool or the buy-in. You don't that wouldn't have happened in the Sunday Brawl. But when the bounty is worth so much more, you see guys playing for that value. So interesting spot, and yeah, it's a good way to wrap up part one. So we'll see you guys back for part two. Take care.